October 9, 2002. Florida State Prison. 9:47 a.m. A woman lies strapped to a gurney. In moments, she'll be dead. But first, she's given one last chance to speak. She talks about sailing with the Rock. About coming back like Independence Day. About Jesus. Her words are cryptic, haunting, almost delusional. But how did she get here? How does a 15-year-old homeless girl living in the woods become one of America's most notorious serial killers? Her name was Aileen Wuornos, and between 1989 and 1990, she killed 7 men along Florida's highways. The media called her a monster, a predator, America's first female serial killer. But behind every killer is a story. Today, we're going back to the beginning. We're diving deep into the life, crimes, arrest, and execution of the woman they called America's Highway Huntress. Some people are handed broken pieces from the very beginning. Aileen Wuornos was one of them. February 29, 1956. A leap year baby, born in Rochester, Michigan, to a mother who was barely more than a child herself. But motherhood didn't last long. Within months, Aileen and her older brother were left behind, abandoned like unwanted baggage. Her father? A convicted predator with a documented history of crimes against children. He would eventually take his own life in prison while Aileen was still in diapers. So the children were sent to live with their maternal grandparents. On paper, it looked like a rescue. In reality, it was just a transfer from one nightmare to another. The grandfather wasn't just strict. He wasn't just old-fashioned or tough. He was a monster in his own right. An alcoholic, violent, and worse. He sexually abused Aileen repeatedly throughout her childhood. But he didn't act alone. He had accomplices. Men who came to the house. Men he trusted. Men who participated in the abuse and rape of a child who had nowhere to run. By the time Aileen reached middle school, she was already shattered. She started trading sexual favors with older boys, cigarettes, food, rides, anything that gave her a brief sense of control or escape. She was 11 years old. Think about that for a moment. 11. At 14, one of her grandfather's accomplices raped her, and she became pregnant. March 23, 1971. Aileen gave birth to a baby boy. She was still a child herself, just 14 years old, holding a newborn she couldn't possibly care for. The baby was immediately put up for adoption. Given where she was living, given what she was enduring, adoption was probably the only mercy that child ever received. A few months later, her grandmother died. Aileen dropped out of school. There was no safety net left. No buffer. Just her grandfather, and that house of horrors. And then, when she turned 15, he kicked her out. 15 years old. Homeless. No diploma. No family. No resources. She ended up living in the woods behind her old school, surviving on whatever she could beg, steal, or sell. This wasn't just a troubled childhood. This wasn't just a rough start. This was systematic destruction. A blueprint written in trauma, drawn by the very people who were supposed to protect her. And out there, alone in the cold, Aileen Wuornos learned one lesson above all others. Trust no one. Survive at any cost. She hit the road, and she never really stopped running. As a teenager, Aileen hit the highways with nothing but anger and desperation. She became a drifter. Colorado, Kansas, Florida, back to Michigan, then Florida again. Always hitchhiking, always running, always selling her body for survival. Her rap sheet grew like a novel. Disorderly conduct, DUI, stealing guns, forging checks, armed robbery, assault. The list went on and on. But the highway made her feel free, in control, invisible. By the late 1980s, Florida became her home base. She worked the roads as a sex worker nearly every single day, sometimes seeing 5 or 6 clients in a night. And that's where things took a new turn. In 1986, inside a smoky lesbian bar in Daytona Beach, Aileen met the woman who would change everything. Her name was Tyria Moore, but everyone called her Ty. Ty became her lover, her companion, her entire emotional world. They moved into cheap motels, lived off Aileen's income, and tried to build something that resembled a life. Ty wasn't violent, but she relied on Aileen financially, and Aileen worked harder, sometimes all night, to keep Ty fed, clothed, and sheltered. They were toxic, codependent, but inseparable. This relationship brought more pressure, more desperation, more chances for something to snap. And eventually, it did. Between 1989 and 1990, bodies started appearing on the sides of highways across Central Florida. Each time, the pattern was the same. Multiple gunshot wounds, a .22 caliber pistol, victims robbed, stripped, and left in wooded areas. The victims: Richard Mallory, an electronics shop owner. His body was found in a wooded area near Daytona. Aileen would later claim he assaulted her, and she shot in self-defense. David Spears, a construction worker, found naked, shot 6 times. Charles Karsken, a part-time rodeo worker, shot 9 times. Troy Burress, a route salesman, disappeared on a delivery run, shot twice. Charles Humphreys, known as Dick, a retired Air Force major and former police chief, shot 7 times. Walter Antonio, a trucker, shot 4 times and dumped off a remote road. Peter Seams, a 65-year-old missionary volunteer. His body was never found, but Aileen's fingerprints were all over his crash car. These murders weren't random. They were patterned, consistent, methodical. Someone was hunting men along the highways, and police couldn't believe it might be a woman. But behind closed doors, detectives whispered the possibility: a female serial killer, a rarity that shocked even seasoned investigators. They pulled fingerprint records, pawn shop receipts, witness statements. Over and over, one name kept appearing: Aileen Wuornos. Then they got their break. Aileen and Ty crashed Peter Seams' stolen car and fled the scene on foot. But multiple witnesses saw them clearly. Descriptions matched the 2 women police were already tracking. Authorities formed a multi-agency task force. Every highway in Central Florida was being watched. They just needed to find her. January 9th, 1991. The Last Resort Bar, a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. Undercover cops sat quietly around Aileen as she drank beer, smoked cigarettes, and talked to strangers. She had no idea she was being watched. When backup arrived, they moved in. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She simply put her hands up and said, "I know why you're here." The next day, they found Ty. And that's when the real betrayal happened. After days of searching, investigators had both women in custody. But they didn't have a confession. Not yet. Ty Moore was terrified. She had never pulled trigger, but she knew how the justice system worked. Just being associated with a series of murders could put her behind bars for life. The police offered her a deal: full immunity, no charges, her life back, but only if she could get Aileen to confess. Ty agreed. Detectives set up a hotel room. They wired the phone, turned on the recorder, and told her, "Just talk. Let her trust you." When Ty called Aileen in jail, Aileen sounded relieved, happy, emotional. In the recorded call, Ty's voice trembled as she told Aileen that police were threatening to charge her as an accomplice. She begged for help, saying she was terrified of going to prison for crimes she didn't commit. At first, Aileen was protective, insisting Ty had nothing to do with the murders. But as Ty continued pleading, her voice breaking with fear, something shifted. This was the moment. Aileen Wuornos, who had survived decades on the streets by trusting no one, was about to sacrifice everything for the one person she loved. The detectives knew exactly what they were doing. They'd found her weakness. Within hours, Aileen gave a full confession. She admitted to all 7 murders, claiming each one was self-defense, but providing details only the killer would know. She described the weapons, the locations, the sequence of events. Detectives cross-referenced every detail with their evidence. It all matched. Detectives stared at each other. Shock, satisfaction, and a strange kind of sadness. Aileen claimed each killing was self-defense, that the men tried to assault her, that she had no choice. But the evidence said otherwise. Multiple bullet wounds. Some victims were shot in the back. Some were shot while dressed, sitting, zipped up. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a reaction. This was an execution. By the time the trial began, Aileen's name was everywhere. Newspapers, TV stations, radios. America had a new obsession. A female serial killer. A rarity. A mystery. The courtroom was packed. Reporters squeezed in shoulder to shoulder. Sketch artists rushed to capture every glare, every tear, every outburst. And Aileen? Aileen did not make things easy. Sometimes she looked bored. Sometimes furious. Sometimes smiling at the cameras like she was starring in her own movie. Prosecutors did something controversial. They introduced Aileen's entire history of violence and theft under the Williams Rule, which allows prior bad acts to prove a pattern. The jury listened as her past was read out like a grocery list. Armed robbery, assault, car theft, disorderly conduct, firing a gun from a moving vehicle. This painted her as someone who had been spiraling for years. Then came the emotional hit. Ty Moore testified against her. Ty appeared nervous, quiet, apologetic. She told the courtroom she had no idea Aileen was killing men. She said she never suspected anything. Aileen's face fell. You can literally see the heartbreak in court footage. She mouthed, "I love you, Ty." But Ty never looked back. January 27, 1992. The jury returned. Aileen stood, jaw clenched, hands shaking. The judge pronounced the sentence, death by lethal injection. Aileen's response was immediate and volatile. She erupted with profanity-laced threats directed at the judge's family. The outburst was so shocking that even seasoned court reporters were taken aback. Security guards moved in, but she wasn't finished. As they escorted her out, she continued shouting, her rage echoing through the courthouse hallways. For more death sentences followed in separate trials. Aileen Wuornos was officially one of the deadliest women in American history. Death row is a lonely place, and for Aileen Wuornos, it only got darker. Locked away for 23 hours a day. No contact visits. No loved ones. No Ty. Her mind began to break down. She started making bizarre allegations against the prison staff. She claimed they were contaminating her food, using experimental sonic weapons on her, and orchestrating psychological torture to make her suicidal. What's chilling is watching the progression. In early interviews, she's angry but coherent. By the late 90s, her eyes darted constantly, she spoke in fragments, and she seemed convinced an entire conspiracy was targeting her specifically. Psychologists who studied her case still debate whether this was genuine mental illness, the effects of prolonged isolation, or calculated manipulation. Her spirit was gone. Her hope was gone. She wanted death. In 2002, filmmaker Nick Broomfield conducted what would become Aileen's final interview. The woman on camera was barely recognizable from the defiant figure in earlier footage. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. Her movements were jerky and unpredictable. She repeated her claims about prison staff corruption and abuse, but then something shifted. Her voice dropped. The anger drained away, and she said something that revealed the truth beneath all the chaos. She wanted it to be over. She was ready to die. Critics later debated whether this was someone who'd given up fighting, or someone who'd been broken by the system. But in that moment, watching that interview, you see something undeniable. This wasn't the fierce woman who'd survived on the streets for decades. This was someone who had nothing left. That interview still haunts people today. October 9, 2002. Florida State Prison. At dawn, the hallways were quiet. Officers moved slowly, respectfully. This was Florida's 10th female execution in history. Aileen refused a special meal. She only wanted a single cup of coffee. As she was strapped onto the gurney, witnesses reported she appeared surprisingly calm, almost peaceful. Some said she looked relieved. When given the opportunity for final words, she made a strange, cryptic statement. She referenced sailing with the Rock, mentioned Independence Day, and said she'd return with Jesus. To this day, people analyze those final words. Some think she was referencing religious salvation. Others believe it was one last delusional statement from a fractured mind. A few conspiracy theorists even think it was coded language. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the confused farewell of someone who'd been failed by everyone, including herself. 9:47 a.m. The drugs were administered. 9:53 a.m. Aileen Wuornos was pronounced dead. After her death, the world debated her life. Was she evil? Or was she a victim who became what her world made her? Some call her a monster. Some call her a product of abuse, abandonment, and trauma. Regardless of opinion, her story remains one of the most tragic, chilling, and complex in American true crime history. Aileen Wuornos became a symbol, not of female power, not of rebellion, but what happens when a child is abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect her. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Aileen was a product of her environment, or do you believe she was simply a fiend? If you made it this far, thank you for watching. This case is heavy, and I appreciate you taking the time to learn about it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into true crime.